Inigo Lopez de Loyola, who later took the name Ignatius, was born the youngest son of a noble family in the Basque region of northern Spain. As a young man, he dreamed of the glories of knighthood, the courts of King Ferdinand, and of winning the hand of a prestigious lady. In his late 20s, Inigo was defending the fortress of Pamplona against a French attack when a cannonball shattered his right leg. Despite his injury, Inigo's courage impressed his French captors, who carried him across Spain back to his family home at Loyola. During a long and painful recovery in which he was confined to his bed, Inigo daydreamed of his previous goals of knighthood and glory. To pass the time, he asked for books about knights and romance, but only 2 books were available: The Life of Christ and The Lives of the Saints. Soon, his daydreams shifted, imagining a life spent imitating saints like Francis of Assisi and Dominic. The after effects of these daydreams fascinated Inigo. When he imagined a life of romance, battles, and personal glory, he was thrilled at first, but soon felt empty and meaningless. But when he envisioned a life spent in service to God, his excitement lasted throughout the day, electrified and consoled him. This experience of comparing these 2 possibilities formed the foundations of a spiritual tool that he would later call discernment of spirits. When Inigo's leg had healed enough to leave Loyola, he traveled to a Benedictine monastery in the mountains of Mount Serrat. After a vigil that lasted through the night, he laid down his sword at the feet of Blessed Mother Mary, accepted his new life in service of God, and took on the life and dress of a pilgrim. For the next year, Inigo dedicated his life to prayer and sacrifice in a nearby town called Manresa. He lived primitively, sleeping in a cave, fasting to extremes that endangered his health, in a misguided attempt at becoming holy. One day, Inigo sat on the bank of the Cardener River and suddenly had a mystical vision that, in his words, opened the eyes of his soul. He later wrote, "From that day, everything appeared in a new light. Such was the abundance of this light that all the knowledge acquired for the rest of my life was not equal to it." Inigo found himself recognizing God's presence in all things, and he reflected on which of his desires led him closer to God and which farther away. The foundations were forming for his spiritual exercises, the fundamental text of Ignatian spirituality.
Discernment of spirits, if you want to do it in a more secular fashion, you just sat down and said, what brought me joy today and what kept me from being joyful today? Those good spirits that are leading you to become the best person possible and deepening your relationship with God, or those bad spirits that are cutting you off from that relationship.
Things did not go always the way that he planned. He had to discern these spirits himself. He was led in so many different directions, and that's how he came up with these rules. It was from his own experience and his own prayer.
This whole tradition is born out of a thirst and a seeking that's willing to ask any question, no questions out of bounds, and it's also open to the answers that the Christian tradition can provide. And that is the key. There's got to be a relentless search and an openness.
Inigo was convinced that he needed to dedicate his life to the imitation of Christ. He traveled to the Holy Land, but the Franciscan leaders sent him home. This apparent setback convinced Inigo that he needed further education in theology and philosophy. He returned to Spain to study Latin, then continued on to the University of Paris, where he changed his name to Ignatius. In Paris, Ignatius gathered a group of well-educated men who were seeking God in all things, and together these 7 friends in the Lord took their vows in this new society of Jesus. They engaged in ministry wherever they found themselves, helping the sick, elderly, and poor. They preached in public, stressing the idea of the Magus, which translates into more, an invitation that asked, "What more might I do for God?" This was a call to seek out the greatest need and discern how best to be of service to God, to the poor, to the world. The early Jesuits were missionaries, traveling to Rome to offer their service to the Pope, throughout Europe to reinvigorate Catholic belief, and then as far as India to introduce the Christian gospel. Yet a great need was closer to home. European society was transforming, with an emerging class of merchants who wanted their sons to experience a robust education, but Ignatius was reluctant to establish schools. Jesuits were meant to live a life on the road, and permanent schools made this impossible. In 1549, Ignatius finally approved the first Jesuit school in Messina, Italy.
What's fascinating to me about Ignatius is that once he kind of got his spiritual act together, he could not help but share that experience with other people. And because of his own personal honesty and charisma, people were drawn to him, more people and more people. And so all of a sudden, you've got an organization. In his mind, the road is the home. You're supposed to be on the road. You just can't take your bag, hop on a galleon, and head across the world anymore. And I'm quite certain Ignatius did not imagine that the consequence of this vision and this spiritual journey that he was on would park him in an office for nearly 20 years. His greatest contribution was that he was able to give that up while creating this organization that by his death numbered into 1,000 people.
They really focused on education, and what he thought was like, this is what we're going to do, changed. So I think being open to that, we don't know what gifts we have and what will unfold.
He was trying to truly figure out his purpose in life. We felt like if it doesn't work this way, then it's not working. But we're all works in progress.
No one's path here is going to be linear. He had this whole mindset of the path he wanted to carve out for himself, and things didn't end up turning out that way, but he never would have ended up building the Society of Jesus without that.
The story of the cannonball. What it allows me to do as a professor is share a sense of vulnerability of my cannonball experiences. These moments in our life where things are not going very well. At the Catholic Jesuit University, there is a sense of vulnerability. We can talk about these experiences as faculty members, as staff members, even with students. Like we're supporting each other in this academic journey, but it's also a personal journey.
Ignatius was very intent that the Society of Jesus wasn't locked up in a monastery somewhere, but they were out among the people and they were working. We can do that too, right? You don't have to be in a monastery. You don't have to be a priest. I think the Jesuit mission very much lends itself to lay people doing that.
By the time Ignatius died in 1556, there were dozens of Jesuit schools, and then hundreds throughout Europe, Asia, and South America. In the following centuries, Jesuits were the schoolmasters of Europe. They were renowned for preaching and the promotion of the spiritual exercises. They were counselors in the royal courts and advocates for native peoples who were often being exploited. This influence, however, created powerful enemies. First in Portugal in 1759, then in Spain and France, the Society of Jesus was suppressed, outlawed, and then by order of the Pope, banished throughout the world. More than 23,000 Jesuit priests, brothers, and students were effectively put out on the street. But the Russian Empress Catherine the Great refused to give up the Jesuit schools in her lands, and only there did the Society of Jesus continue. After 41 years, in 1814, Pope Pius VII finally restored the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits in Poland, who had never stopped their ministries, became the foundation for the newly restored society. Since then, the Society of Jesus has expanded far beyond its early years in educational, intellectual, pastoral, and social outreach. Today, the Society's ministries transcend geographical, political, and cultural boundaries.